Hi, I'm Anita Burns. Welcome to the Open Mind Show. In this edition, we are going to be talking to Jan Vandersande Ph.D., who has been entrenched in the scientific community for many, many years and started studying physical phenomena from seances and mediums. And his findings are quite interesting. I think you'll enjoy our talk. Welcome. May I call you Jan?
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
So Jan, tell me, how did you get interested in physical phenomena?
Well, my wife and I, when I got married, we both had this same interest in life after death. So initially, to investigate that, we started going to where you could go with mediums, and the best place to go is actually some spiritualist churches where we went. And there were some mediums performing on stage, but to be honest, we never really got any good evidence, never got any good messages. A bit disappointing.
Yeah.
And then we met some young people there, so we started sitting in a development circle to try to develop people into becoming mediums.
Was that here in California?
This was in South Africa.
South Africa?
Yeah, because I did
okay.
my master's degree at Cornell University, and then I went to South Africa to do my PhD on diamonds, the physical properties of diamonds. And that's where I met my wife. Like I said, we got married, and we were both interested in life after death. These developmental circles are interesting because these are circles which unfortunately don't happen that much anymore. These are circles to try to develop people to become mediums. And we had one person there who developed, and he supposedly became a trance medium, but again, the messages weren't all that convincing. So then one day, my wife and I went to the store just across from the university to buy some fine furniture for our flat. And while we were buying the furniture, I spoke to the person there, the lady, Sarah Wolf, and said to her, yeah, we need some chairs that are stiff backs because we don't want anybody to fall asleep in our circles. And then she looked at me and said, what do you mean circles?
Yeah, she said, circles?
Circles? And then she said, oh, are you interested in psychic phenomena? I said, oh yeah, we sit in a circle. I thought I was a big shot, so, oh yeah, we sit in a developmental circle. And she said, oh, have you experienced anything, seen anything? Oh no, not really, I said. So she said, well, would you like to see something? And immediately, of course, my wife and I said, absolutely. So they invited us to one of their circles. We had no idea they were mediums. They invited us. Her husband was Mickey. She's Sarah Wolf. They're both in their late 50s, early 60s. So about 2 weeks later, we went to their home, to a circle, and there were about 4 to 5 other people there. We had no idea what was going on. I mean, we were really new to all of this. So we went into the seance room, and everything was totally blacked out. The windows were totally blacked. There was a black curtain across one of the corners of the room. There were 2 chairs behind the curtain, and there were about 6 chairs, semicircle. And in the middle there, on the ground, was a trumpet. It's like a megaphone. The ones you see at cheerleaders, cheerleaders use at, or used to use at football games. So it's sort of like a trumpet. It was about a 1.5 feet high. With luminous paint around the top, the bottom, and luminous spots. So my wife and I sitting there looking, and there was a red light hanging there. And they told us just to sit down, so we sat down. And Mickey and Sarah went behind the curtain, sat behind there, and all the lights were switched out. It was totally black, and all we could see was the luminous spots on the trumpet, sitting on the floor there. And
It was on the floor. There was no
standing,
table.
no tables. You're standing on the floor in front, and we were sitting in a semicircle, sitting in the front, and there was the curtain here. Behind that, Mickey and Sarah sat.
Okay.
And so the other sitter said, "We've got to sing a few songs to get some excitement going." And
Just curious, what songs did they sing? Do you remember?
Yeah, I can't sing, so I shut my mouth up. But she'll be coming around the mountain. And
Oh, really?
Oh God!
Oh, my goodness!
I know, terrible songs. My wife could sing, thank God. I can't, so I didn't even bother. Anyway, so after a few minutes, all of a sudden a voice started coming from the cabinet. He called himself Brian, actually a sort of an American accent, very characteristic voice, and he introduced himself, and he started talking to everybody. He came to us, and he said, hello, and welcome to the circle, and hope you enjoy it. And he said, now we'll get some excitement going. And all of a sudden, the trumpet started lifting from the floor.
Wow.
So I thought, oh God, that's the guy, sitting, getting on his knees from behind the curtain, of course, holding it up and starting and moving it. And this trumpet started going up, flying around the room like a bee does.
Wow.
Whizzing around, up to the ceiling, coming to each individual sitter, tapping him on the head, tapping he or her on the knee, stopping in front of sitters, then flying around the room. There's no way anybody could have done that in the pitch dark.
Yeah.
You try in the pitch dark to even walk around without bumping into anything.
I
let
do that
alone-
when it's not pitch dark.
Exactly, and let alone take a trumpet and have it move up to the ceiling, to the corners.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there are magicians who claim, oh, this is all phony, this is fraud, because they say all the medium does is tie a string to it and whiz it around. This wasn't the trumpet whizzing. This was the trumpet flying from corner to corner, ceiling to ceiling,
Okay.
to the floor, and like I said, touching individual. Came up, touched me on the head, very gentle touch, touched me on the
Didn't
knee.
go and whack everybody.
No, it doesn't go whack or anything. No, and then eventually it would stop right in the middle, and a voice started speaking through it. And this was another guy that come through and started speaking through the trumpet. So my wife and I, of course, sitting there first thinking, of course, it must be Mickey and Sarah doing that. But then you start thinking, wait a minute, that's difficult. How do they do that? That's really not possible.
Right.
So and then the voice started speaking through it, and they use it as
And
sort
it
of
didn't sound like Mickey or
Sarah. No, this was
Sarah.
a German lady called, I forgot her name for a second.
well, let's call her Frida.
Yeah, well, it was close. It was a very German accent, started speaking, and she was talking about life, the purpose, more philosophical teachings.
So were the messages more useful than the messages you received before?
Well,
in
she
other
didn't give
places?
messages. She did philosophy. Then the
Okay.
trumpet came down, and then Brian would come back.
Mm-hmm.
But this time, Brian wasn't talking from behind the curtain. You could actually hear Brian sort of in front of the curtain, about 6 feet up. So because you could hear the voice coming from there. So I thought, well, Sarah must have gotten up, and she was standing there. But no, she's still sitting behind the curtain in trance. Sarah was a trance medium. You know, she's in total trance, a deep trance. And we only learned afterwards that's what's called direct voice,
Oh, okay.
where the medium actually forms an ectoplasmic voice box. Where
For the people who don't know, what is ectoplasm?
ectoplasm is something, and maybe the best way to describe it is the first time we saw it. This was another sitting we had with Mickey and Sarah. Now, even though Mickey and Sarah are mediums, they produce ectoplasm, they were not strong enough to produce it in red light. But they invited one of their friends.
Wait, I just stop you because
Yeah.
we're going to have a lot of people watching who don't know what that means, not strong enough to produce it in red light?
Yeah, because ectoplasm is very sensitive to light.
Oh, okay.
So that's why most mediums produce it in the dark, and then you'll have like the trumpet flying around. The trumpet is actually, ectoplasm actually tied to the trumpet back to the medium.
And ectoplasm is sort of a spirit force?
I was just going to get to that.
Okay.
Sorry, let me get to the ectoplasm, and then we'll go back and explain
Okay.
how the trumpet moves. By the way, in my book, there's some very nice pictures.
Yeah, and we'll talk about
Yeah,
your book
yeah,
in just a minute,
it-
too. It's Life After Death, Some of the Best Evidence. And
And
we'll
there-
show you where you can order the book later.
Yeah, and there's the beautiful pictures of ectoplasm, of materializations, and how the trumpets are moved. But getting back to ectoplasm, so Mickey and Sarah weren't strong enough to produce ectoplasm in the red light or white light, but only in the dark.
Okay.
So they invited one of their friends, Kitty and Max Gordon, who were about 10 years their elder. She was already in her late 60s. And she'd been a materialization medium for about 30 years. And apparently she was phenomenal. And they invited her. She really didn't want to sit anymore. She was tired of it after 30 years, but they came anyway. And she sat with Mickey and Sarah in the cabinet behind the black curtain.
And that's called the cabinet?
The cabinet,
Okay.
yeah. And they allowed us to turn the red light on, which with previously with Mickey and Sarah never happened. Because, like I said, when they produce ectoplasm, it was just too sensitive and would have hurt Sarah. But with Kitty, we were allowed to turn the red light on.
Oh, okay.
So the red light was turned on, and you could see Sarah in trance, down. You could see Kitty in trance, down. And but trance, for those who aren't familiar with it, is just like a sleep state.
Right, right.
And all of a sudden, you see this white stuff pouring from Kitty's nose. And this white stuff started pouring down her body, and started forming a sheet covering her body. And there's a beautiful picture in the book of a medium, actually, with ectoplasm a bit further back.
Okay, I'll find it. Keep
Yeah,
talking.
maybe it shows. And this ectoplasm started forming a sheet and going onto the ground. And then one of the sitters was asked by the guides, there is the next one, the next page.
Next page?
Next page, the one after that. Yeah, there it
That
shows. Yeah,
I don't know if the camera can pick this up or not, but
there it shows This is a different medium in Johannesburg, and I'll talk about him in a second. But there you can see the ectoplasm coming from his nose, covering his body, just like we saw with Kitty in red light. Then we were told, or one of the sitters was asked, to pick up the ectoplasm that was on the floor and to hold it up and start walking across the room. So they had this full sheet of ectoplasm for about 6 to 8 feet long, about 6 feet high, all tied to Kitty's nose. And you sit there looking at it, you say, no, this isn't possible.
What did it feel like? Did you get to touch it?
We weren't allowed to touch it, only that one person.
Oh, okay.
It looks like sort of silky, what do you call that stuff? Cheeseclothy kind of silky kind of material. It was an odor there, like I thought it was like a human perspiration smell sort of to it. And but I'm sitting there as a scientist, as a physicist. You know, we've done a lot of experiments. You look at this and you say, there's no way,
Yeah.
you know, I can be fooled. I'm seeing what I'm seeing.
Right. You were looking at it with an objective eye.
Yeah, I mean, you look
Not,
at this.
not the eyes of a believer.
Exactly. You say, wait a minute, is this possible? And all of a sudden, the person holding this ectoplasm across the room was asked to drop it. Just let it go. And you could see it fall to the ground, and within a few seconds, it went all right back into Kitty's nose.
Wow. Now,
And-
I'm still confused about what is ectoplasm?
Ectoplasm it basically consists of stuff out of the human body. It has been analyzed by Professor Richet. This was back in 1915. He actually wrote a book on this. He actually won a Nobel Prize for chemistry. And he analyzed it, and basically it consists of what the human body consists of. So they've just taken from the human body, plus supposedly, according to the spirit entities, they've added some of their own stuff to it from the spirit
And
world.
so what's the purpose of ectoplasm? Oh, why? Why?
Then the purpose is on the front cover of my book. And the purpose is that this ectoplasm then forms into what they call full materializations. And a full materialization is that person in white. They're talking to one of the sitters. And I have several pictures in the book. And the photographs that I have in the book, which have never been published before, were taken by a friend of ours, who was also a friend who used to sit with Mickey and Sarah, who's not used to sit, who sat with Mickey and Sarah. And his name was Professor Jack Allen. He was professor of anatomy at the university where I was doing my doctor's degree. And he was very fortunate to have had a sitting, or several sittings, with a medium in Johannesburg who would never give his name, because he was very high up in an insurance company, and he didn't want anybody to know that he was doing this.
Right.
Unfortunately, spiritualism or anything psychic has, for some people, bad connotations.
Oh, yeah.
In the scientific world, I mean, if I would have gone in my physics department and talked about it and lectured about it, I would have been labeled a nutcase. I would have been labeled not with it.
Right.
I would have been criticized, ostracized, because,
Well, it's probably still that way.
of course it is. It's
So
still that way.
I have another question. Okay, so you get full materialization.
So what happens is this ectoplasm then builds up into a full materialization
And for what purpose?
for the purpose of proving life after death. In other words, a lot of these materializations are relatives of sitters in the circle.
So, okay, so let me see if I understand this. So the spirit of the relative, let's say,
Yeah.
uses the ectoplasm in order to appear.
To clothe himself in ectoplasm, you're right.
Okay.
And like he looked like when he was on this earth plane.
Okay, well then, let me play devil's advocate here. I mean, I'm not doubting you at all, but there's another element, because I've seen spirits all my life, and they look just as real as you sitting there. So how are they doing that? Is it just because I can see them and they're not actually appearing for everybody, or?
That's, I think, the difference. The difference is you are psychic, you're definitely, obviously, you're very psychic. You can see spirits, whereas the average person cannot. There's a very, very small percentage of people who can see spirits.
Okay.
And you're one of them. But a materialization, everybody
can see.
Because
I get it now.
everybody can see the ectoplasm, everybody can see the materialization. And the pictures in the book, where there are two of them were taken by Professor Jack Allen, they were either relatives of people at the circle, or they were guides of people in the circle.
So I take it the guy with the beard here is probably a guide
You're
rather
right.
than a relative?
Yeah, I think he's a guide. I think he's a guide.
Maybe that's Uncle
I
Frank
just-
that we really don't talk about?
No, I have no idea, but there are cases, and I discuss in my book, because, but let me finish this first. This Professor Jack Allen was so convinced that these were genuine, because he himself, being a skeptic like everybody else, even though in his, of course, in the department where he worked, you know, as professor of anatomy, he would never admit that he did this or believed in it. But when he was with us, he was like us, very skeptical. He would challenge everything, examine everything like I did, and there's no way these things were not, were genuine. There was no doubt to him. And he took some beautiful photographs of these full materializations. And what's so impressive about this is, if you can look back at the bottom there, look at all that ectoplasm on the floor there.
Is that what that is?
Yeah. Now, and that ectoplasm, by the way, goes all back to the medium, is attached to the medium.
And who is this woman?
That's one of the sitters in the circle.
It's one of the sitters, and this was a guide of hers? Or is
No, that's what I assume. I don't know. Professor Allen never told me that.
Okay.
But if this was the medium dressed up, first of all, look at all the folds, the creases.
Right, right.
This is not something you just quickly dress up in a minute or two.
True, true.
And also, if you're going to come up under, like a lot of these magicians claim you have, trap doors where people walk up over trap doors.
I mean, to be fair, that does go on.
100% honest, and I discussed it in my book. There are people who do this. But in Johannesburg, where we lived, the houses don't have basements. There are no trap doors. And that's the first thing we look for. Are there any trap doors? Are there any doors in the side of the walls or something like that?
So you were looking at it with a skeptic side,
we look, because, I mean, there I'm seeing this and saying, wait a minute, is this true or not? Is this
so
really...
how long would a manifestation like this last?
The best one to discuss probably is Alec Harris. Alec Harris was born in Wales, late 1890s, and he eventually started sitting in circles. He became a materialization medium. He would produce, listen to this, up to 30 different materializations in a sitting.
So they just last a few minutes each?
They last a few minutes each. Some would last 5 minutes, some would last 1 or 2 minutes.
Does it take a lot of energy from the sitter?
What he does is, apparently, according to the spirit guides, they take the ectoplasm from the medium, who actually has to be somebody special.
Okay.
Very few people have this ability to produce materializations. But apparently they also take this ectoplasm from the sitters. So that helps.
Okay, so when they dissipate, and it goes all back in, so there's no permanent harm done.
There's no permanent harm. They have done experiments back late 1890s, 1900s, because materializations were already, from those days. There are photographs dating back to those days.
Right, didn't this phenomenon start with the Fox sisters in 1800?
Well, that was not materialization, those were knocks.
Those were knocks, that's right.
Yeah, no, the very famous one started back about 1870, where certain mediums produced materializations who were photographed, even in white light.
I saw some of those, but I used to know a man named Robert Cheney, who was very active in that, and he had an album of all sorts of photographs of ectoplasm that he was with circles that he was involved in. It was very interesting.
Oh yeah, there were photographs, but everybody was, they're fraud, they were phony. And I, in my book, discuss the pros and cons of many of these cases. But the Alec Harris case, the reason I discuss them in so much detail is that Alec Harris was written up in many magazines, written up by magicians who went to his circles and said he's totally genuine. One magician even had his dead brother or something materialize. I mean, that's pretty convincing.
That would be convincing for me.
And then the reason I talk about Alec Harris is because he moved to Johannesburg. And Mickey and Sarah, the people we sat with for 8 years, actually used to sit with Alec Harris. So we actually heard all these stories about Alec Harris producing all these materializations.
So do you think you would like to learn to be a material
Unfortunately, medium? I don't think they never told me. They never told me I had the capability. But
how do they know who has the capability? I mean, how do people train for something like that?
That's why you go to developmental circles.
And then you find out if you've got it or not.
Very quickly, you find out if you have it or not.
If you have the right stuff.
A very good example is Leslie Flint, who was a direct voice medium. Leslie Flint, who was born in England around the turn of the century, early 1900s, and who was interested, and one day went to a spiritualist church, and somebody said, you're going to be a medium. He looked around saying, what, you're nuts or something? So, but then he went to a developmental circle. The first circle he went to, he thought he'd fallen asleep. And after he'd woken up, he said, God, sorry for falling asleep. And he said, that was okay. You were talking in trance. And so it goes very fast. I mean, you will know if you're a medium. And for those people who are interested, the best thing to do is to start a circle with friends. And if you're into it, interested friends. And you never know. Somebody might just, after a few weeks, a few months, somebody might just doze off into trance, or start seeing like
We've
you
seen-
do.
I was in a circle like that for many years with at a place that was called Cynetics at that time, now called Learning Light Center. And I got nothing, but a lot of people around me got stuff. It happened to me like many years later.
It's possible, but you still had to develop. Some people it goes puke like that.
Yeah.
I've never had it. I've never seen anything. I've never had clairvoyance. Occasionally you get an impression, but that's you don't know how serious that is. But I've always investigated. I've read all I could, and that's what I've done in my book. I've taken, like I said, it's called Life After Death, Some of the Best Evidence. I've taken the best cases that I could find in the literature. And those mediums who I believe were totally honest and never proven to be fraudulent. Like Alec Harris, who sat for all those years, producing up to 30 materializations a sitting. Our friends Mickey and Sarah sat with him numerous times and have witnessed these materializations. He's never been proven to be fraudulent.
So are there circles that have physical, what do you call it?
Phenomena.
Physical phenomena? Are there any, are there any in the United States or?
All I know of two materialization mediums at the moment, one is in Australia and one is in England.
Okay.
I am sure there are many more. And the reason is it's dangerous to be a materialization medium. And
Dangerous? Oh yeah, I guess it would be.
This happened to Alec Harris. There were some journalists who managed to get into one of his sittings. They wanted to prove he was a hoax, he was a phony. They wanted to prove that all it was him dressed up in white sheets. And they managed to somehow get a phony invitation, so, because you have to be very careful who you invite. They came into the circle, and when one of the materializations, of Alec Harris' materializations, walked out and started greeting people, they actually walked out and started shaking hands with them, they jumped on this ectoplasmic materialization. The ectoplasm just collapsed into the ground and shot back into Alec Harris, and it shot back into him, and he was sick for many, many years.
Oh, I guess. Wow.
Oh yeah, he was
So
not
you have to be
well.
very careful, because I know this is really popular in England
Very popular.
and English-speaking countries, but it's sort of disappeared out here. And I looked for one for a long time and couldn't find one.
There was one in Seattle, Washington. I forgot his name. Just forgot his name now. But there was one there, and there have been. And he actually went to Japan, where actually filmed his materializations. So, what was it? Sorry, I just forgot his name.
It's okay.
But here in the U.S., I think a lot of people, if they do produce materialization, they're not going to go out and publicize it. Why do you want Joe Public to come?
Right.
Sorry.
I understand. It's just if you're interested, the message will come to you.
And exactly, and they will have sittings. They will invite people, and but this one in Australia, like I said, I'm hoping maybe I can get him to come here to the West Coast
That would be
for some
great.
demonstrations.
Well, if he does, let us know.
Yeah, David Thompson, and he gives sittings, and he goes around the world, and he was in New York a few months ago, gave sittings there. And he still produces materialization. In red light, you could see the ectoplasm coming, but for the full materializations, they turn the red light off. But the full materializations come, they speak with distinctive voices, they come and shake hands, relatives of people sitting in the circle.
Well, that would certainly be something to experience.
Oh, it's just experiencing the trumpet flying is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And
Well, I've had cups fly across with poltergeists, but
but this is done at will. This is not done by people trying to play
Right.
poltergeists who are trying to mess around and do it for that. My wife and I sat with Mickey and Sarah for 8 years. For 8 years, initially we sat very often. Towards the end, when they were getting elderly, they just didn't sit that often anymore. But for 8 years, every time we sat with them, this trumpet would sit there and started buzzing around the room. And the beauty is that when you read in the literature, it happens so often. With Leslie Flint it happened. With Tom Harrison, who wrote a book also about his mother, who was a materialization medium, again, in England. And I have some of his photographs in there. They have earlier people back in the early days, people again describing the same thing, this trumpet whizzing around the room, touching people, stopping, talking. It's an experience that if you ever have the chance, it is phenomenal. And I show pictures in the book how the trumpet is actually attached with ectoplasm to the medium. So that's just phenomenal.
Well, if people wanted to get in touch with you about this or order your book, how would they do it?
Best thing is two ways. You can go to my website with the publisher, which is www.outskirtspress, outskirtspress.com/, Best Evidence.
Best
so that's,
Evidence.
So that's the evidence. So that's the website. There's a way to contact me and send me an email,
Okay.
and that's the best way to do it.
Well, you know, we're running out of time, but I want to thank you so much. I know we could go on forever about this. It's so fascinating, so interesting, and maybe one of these days I'll get to experience it firsthand.
I hope you do,
Yeah.
because like I said, it's an experience you'll never forget.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And remember, the title of the book is Life After Death, Some of the Best Evidence, written by Dr. Jan Vandersande, who was a skeptic at first, although interested skeptic, and found the evidence that he was looking for. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to subscribe to our show so that you don't miss 1 minute of all the wonderful guests that we have for you. Good night, or good day, or good morning, wherever you are.